Welcome to your readings for the week of the last week of March through the 30th. Getting into April in the next week here. We have, you wouldn't know it looking at the video, but this room is packed, literally packed with stuff from various places in the studio because we have this huge party happening tonight. And all this little stuff is just sort of packed in here, but you wouldn't even know it except for the stand there. Okay, let's get through this. Lots going on. Let's start with Darcy. So actually things are quieting down and calming down in Taurus, which is nice. We're going to move into a nice little groove. Which to me is things are just trucking along like you're getting a normalcy. You got a job, you got a schedule, and you just kind of sort of fall into that routine of life, which is nice. And because there's not a whole lot influencing things, the moon a little bit as it moves around because it is moving in opposition with both Jupiter and Uranus, and that's gonna happen Tuesday, Wednesday, no, Thursday, Friday. That's going to happen Thursday, Friday. Now, all of the focus is on your support system. Who is there? Your ride or die people, right? And with Jupiter and Uranus, generally all week long, just in a sextile with Mars and Saturn. Mars and Saturn are really focused on long-term goals. So this is really um kind of getting the support that you need to focus on those specific long-term goals, if that makes sense. So things are kind of really good there. You got a job that's seems to be doing well. You're sort of getting into that routine, which is kind of nice. So now it's not that it's time to jump right into what the next step is, but it kind of is, just to kind of come up with an idea maybe of what your next step is. And it just feels like you have a lot of people there to discuss those options and those opportunities, and not just, in your business, but personal as well. Talks about what kind of vacations, what kind of shows, now that money's flowing again, what are we going to do to entertain ourselves, kind of a thing. The moon coming in Thursday and Friday is going to create a little bit of a challenge because when you need specific support, kitty tail, kitty tail, when you need specific support around certain things, you have an expectation that certain people are going to be supportive. And sometimes they just totally drop the ball, like crazy drop the ball. So I kind of feel like this is one of those instances, to me, it's sort of like, um, when I'm just not feeling all that great, and maybe it's the girl thing, the monthly thing, whatever, or I'm just sick because I'm an extremely independent person all the time, but not when I'm sick. I'm horribly, horribly whiny. And so in any case, when I'm feeling in that mode and I need something and my husband is just like not available, whether he's emotionally not available or physically not available or whatever, it's really hard not to go into that, of course he's not available to me, blah, blah, blah thing, right? And it's not that most of the time he's absolutely available. He's just not available now in my little state of whatever. So I don't see it as anything that's really a big deal. It's more something that you just need to be aware of to make sure that you don't take it to a place that you don't need to take it to. For a couple of different reasons. One, we wind up getting mad at our partners and they don't even know why. And two, we just make it very difficult for ourselves by focusing all of that frustrated energy on that, which just makes us get more and more and more frustrated. And it's just not helpful. It's just better to not waste the time on that, I guess, if that makes sense. And sometimes I make the right choice and sometimes really in that whiny place. And so I don't make the right choice, and I suffer for it miserably. And so does my husband sometimes. King of Pentacles in reverse is the card that I'm pulling for you today. And the King of Pentacles in reverse indicates be wary of schemes to make money quickly. Those are like everywhere now, right? It also does represent stubbornness and possessiveness. So, what's funny about those two words actually is they really go with what I was saying about somebody just not being able to be supportive in the moment. You know what I mean? And it's that kind of stubbornness and possessiveness, I think that or derives from that just kind of makes us go a little crazy or in a little crazy direction, if that makes sense. Not that crazy is a bad thing, you know? Um, it kind of is what it is. Luckily, once that's done, we move away from that, and there is no more challenges. There's just those couple of days. Everything else is pretty helpful. It's flowing, like the river has no dams or anything. It's just flowing. Everything is flowing beautifully. Enjoy the flow. Another interesting layer is that occasionally when things are going too good, we kind of look for something to be wrong. So think about that also on those days where the moon comes in. So that's what I have for you. Moving on to Kendra, it's really awesome how things are starting to smooth out. Like this is really the energy that I feel with Taurus right now, because it's moved out of any major challenges. Any kind of challenges that we're getting now are because the moon is moving around and kind of interacting with it, which we do have a moon opposition this week on Thursday and Friday, which we'll get to in a minute. But for now, focus is on your support system. So who's there to support you? Jupiter's about growing that support. Uranus is really about looking outside of the box for that kind of support. So maybe not necessarily somebody that you would normally think to be a support system for you also is somebody that you now decide you need to maybe pay a little bit more attention to, because it's highly possible that this person really could provide something that's going to help you boost all of your plans and your goals, if that makes sense. Both planets are still in a sextile with Saturn and Mars, both of which are going towards your long-term goals. So Mars is a tremendous energy going towards those goals. You're looking at it responsibly. And in many ways with Saturn also, Saturn is very feet on the ground. So when we're talking about our long-term goals, what we're really focused on is not this one, this one, this one, and this one, but moving the main one forward, if that makes sense. It's it's not that Saturn is saying the ideas that are coming through sometimes about other things are bad, but you just want to avoid letting them kind of get in the way or distract you from what you're doing, if that makes sense. That's the whole thing, is the elimination of distractions. Having that energy going towards your long-term goals, it does kind of help smooth things out and slow things down so that you have the main focus and you're just sort of following through with that while taking the ideas of other things and jotting them down, so that you can go back to them later on. But it's sort of smoothing things out so that you're focused on one main thing right now, in terms of those long-term goals, and putting a whole lot of energy into that one specific thing. Kitty tail. So that's good. And that's really the energy that we go into most of the week with, is we have that all week long. There is the little bit of an issue with the moon moving into opposition with Jupiter and Uranus on Thursday and Friday. And that's kind of it. The challenge there really isn't like you're trucking along and somebody knocks you off your horse and it takes you 2 days to get up. But it could be more like somebody, you're trucking along and somebody says, "Hey, get off the horse," and stops you. It's more of a frustration and not necessarily something that you have to recover from. So I kind of take this opposition to be like, the example that I used in the last reading was like, one of those times where when I don't feel good, I'm terrible. I'm a terrible, horrible, whiny, clingy person. Okay. I'm an extremely independent woman the rest of the time. When I don't feel good, I even can't stand to be around myself. So when I need something from my husband and he's not there on top of it in that moment, I tend to mentally, emotionally, mentally go to this. Of course, he's not there for me because he doesn't love me. It's this drastic place, right? And it doesn't have to be like that. And if I'm smart, I don't allow it to get to that point. But when I don't put boundaries on it, it just gets worse and worse and worse and more intense and more blown up from there. So it's not necessarily somebody outwardly being unsupportive. It's somebody that just can't be supportive in that moment or can't understand where I'm coming from. And I have to tell myself I can't force them to understand where I'm coming from, because it's their choice for them not to understand it, or maybe they just can't, they don't have the capacity. So it can slow you down if you let it, but it's not something that's just going to come in and knock you clean on your behind either. I really don't get that sense. It's I think it's in many cases for growth purposes, it's one of those tests to see if you learned your lesson and are following through with what you learned. That's how I take it anyways. It's still annoying, but it is what it is. Okay, one more shuffle here. And we're gonna split and we're gonna pull and we get the Hermit. I don't know. I mean, you've been getting the Hermit a lot. I know I've definitely pulled this card a lot in these readings. The Hermit seems to come up a lot in these readings. I've also noticed a pattern where one card specifically will like to come up for a lot of people, no matter how much I shuffle it, and it'll come up in two different ways. Honestly, to have the Hermit come up when I just said there's so much energy going towards your long-term goals, it's not so much about separating yourself. I think it is about separating yourself for specific reasons, like, when you're just, like, say, feeling a little crabby and you need to be alone, right? Or just, I need to step away and meditate. I need 5 minutes to myself. That's also good too. But also having the support that you need to grow what it is that you're trying to grow is great, but you need time to absorb that also. And that's where the Hermit comes in. It's a balance of working together and separately, or together and alone, because having that balance allows you more time to really absorb and understand the process, and maybe allow the meditation to come through and allow your intuition to also be a part of it as well. Because I think that sometimes when other people are involved, it's a little bit harder for our intuition to really truly come through, and that's where meditation is really important. So that's what I have for you. Fun stuff, lots of fun stuff going on. I know you got your hands full with all kinds of stuff. And it's always been like that. But I love how you guys are constantly moving forward. You're constant, and it can be very stressful, I'm sure, to be in what feels like that pattern, but the results are just going to be amazing. And that's what it comes down to. So that's what I have for you, Kendra. Moving on to Jeannette, we have no planets in Gemini. And this is really our last full week, I think, of Vespa in Gemini also, because it's right there on the cusp. I'm not sure if it's going to go retrograde or not. So I guess we'll wait and see. But it is 29 degrees. We're ending the week at 29 degrees. So it's pretty, I mean, it's pretty much on the cusp of Cancer and bringing that element of things into it a little bit. Focus continues to be on garbage day. Is what I'm gonna call it. Garbage day. It's where a lot of old stuff, triggers and stuff like that keep coming up. And it's very frustrating when that happens, especially when it seems to feel like it's happening one after the other, after the other, after the other. It's like you can almost never really recover from it in some ways. And with Vespa continuing to be in the sign, we're still focusing most of those triggers on the roots of our insecurities, which, to be honest with you, everybody has insecurities. Number one, we have various levels of insecurities. And there are various different roots to our insecurities. So, for instance, they can range from being adopted and that creating insecurities to somebody saying something that just sticks with you forever. Like, I don't know, when I was like 19 or 20 or 18, 19, 20, somewhere around that age, I went to the grocery store up the street from my house, and there was these young kids. And as I walked by, you know, one of them just yelled, "Oh my God, what an ugly woman," and I just kind of looked like, "Fuck you talking to here?" Um, and I don't consider myself that, and I mean, I was 20, so I mean, I looked, I looked the way I look. And, but it still stuck with me. It's funny how just the other day, actually, it sort of came up and it's like, whoa, like, why is that even still a thing? Because it happens. And it's probably a thing now because I nitpick every little line and all the problems that I have with my face every time it has to be on camera. So that's probably why but it's a root to an insecurity that was given to me by some random brat in a parking lot at the grocery store. They can stick forever. So it's important to keep, as annoying as it is, it's important to keep addressing this, because various different situations happening around you that cause the trigger are also going to give you the information you need to understand where it comes from so that you can make peace with that and no longer have it as an insecurity. So, an example of what that would look like to make peace with that is for me to accept that this child who decided I was an ugly woman in that moment, um, was just being a kid. And it's okay for him to feel like that. It's not offensive to me, no longer offensive to me that he feels like that. And it also, interestingly enough, triggers a younger part of myself who was one of those bratty kids that would go around just insulting people because it was funny. So it's not just a trigger of something that somebody had done to me, but it's working through the karma of what I actually did to other people, right? That's something that I literally just thought of when I was doing your reading right now, by the way, because that's how it happens, right? Sometimes the triggers are because somebody hurt us, and most of the time that's what we're focused on. But sometimes we also open up little pieces of our past where maybe that happened to us for a reason because we were supposed to learn that lesson in some way. So there's another layer to that trigger. And the more we go through those layers, the more we get through to the deeper parts. My stepmom always said that healing was like peeling an onion. You got to peel the layers, and when you get to that really juicy center there, it's hard to get through, so you have to kind of chip away at it, if that makes sense. Interesting stuff. No other planets influencing things. I do have to say this, and that is that I really feel that lately you've done a really fantastic job in terms of overthinking, worrying, and just getting it done instead of spending the time or getting distracted by other things. You got to pat yourself on the back for that. That is, if you can still do that. I don't know. Okay, I'm going to pull a card for you here. The Empress in reverse. This is interesting. The Empress in reverse. I'm just going to read the whole thing and then we'll pick it apart because it's kind of long. Indicates infertility and miscarriage. It could be an indication that the questioner is being overindulgent, maybe spending too much money, becoming wasteful. On the other hand, if the questioner is a man, which you're not, but it could be about Mario, this placement indicates he has an overpossessive wife or mother who may stifle his progress if he doesn't get the situation in hand. That's actually really interesting. And I can almost see both, that it's about you and it's about him a little bit. I don't, of course, want to tell him he's got an overbearing mother or anything like that. But what's interesting is that it feels like, in a way, there's still tension there. And it's almost like it's showing both sides. Now, a miscarriage is not necessarily means a physical miscarriage, but it could be more like this was my plan and nothing came of my plans. It's a miscarriage. So you're pregnant with an idea and you can't do it, so you miscarry it, if that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily mean an actual baby. The overindulgence, I'm just going to say this and then I'll be done with it. The overindulgence part, it's very common for a lot of people to waste money when they need money. It's kind of a stupid thing that we all do it. I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't, and so maybe that coming up is more of a warning to maybe not do that. If you've been doing it or thinking about doing it, or someone's watching, your dad's watching, I don't know, something along those lines. So that's what I have for you, my friend. Moving on to Connie, we don't have any planets in Leo this week at all. Focus continues to be on the mind, but it's also moving to the past. So what's interesting here is that we kind of sort of move into a space where there's more than one focus because the houses are really small in that area at this time. So there's a couple of different things about that. Obviously, the obvious, which is that this the past or situations in the past, different things that have happened in the past that are taking up a lot of your time and space mentally. Um, in many cases, there are things out there that trigger it. I mean, there's a million things out there that trigger it. So that you're pretty prepared for that. I think, again, and it sucks that it feels like we've been talking about this for weeks, but in the same sense, as we've been working together one-on-one and talking about this for weeks, one of the things that I've been noticing is that you are lessening the amount of time it's taking. It's almost like each week you peel another layer off and that's done. And, we're getting down to really mainly focusing on the things that took place during that time with your dad that you really just have a hard time letting go of, which makes sense. Somebody breaching your security is not easy to let go of. And I agree with that. I still say that camera system really needs to be a priority, even if it's just cameras that record, like to your computer in the front. I mean, to me, that would just make me feel a little bit more secure in knowing, just in case. The other thing is, obviously, I know that there's issues with your car at this point. So, in terms of being inundated with work, I don't see that. Mainly because you're going to be dealing with that and you really don't have a way of getting to your appointments without the car. Um, I'm seeing confusion around something and I don't know what that is. I'm not sure if it has to do with the car, with the insurance company. I mean, it would make sense with the insurance company because you know how they like to word things to confuse you, but I'm just seeing this confusion around something and I can't. Okay, this is what Frankie is saying about it. Whatever it is that's causing the confusion really is caused not by the fact that you don't understand, but the way you're emotionally reacting to it. So either you're panicking about it, or it's some sort of emotional reaction. As you work through the emotional reaction, it becomes clearer. And it doesn't have anything to do with work. This has something to do with the car or something to do with something around involved in that in some way, if that makes sense. So I'm not seeing it as a cut and dry, easy fix, unfortunately. I'm not saying it can't be fixed, but it's possible that they may try and total it, but I think you can still do that and get the payout and still get it fixed. or there's some way around it or something like that. And so the more panicked you are about it, the less likely you're able to fix the problem. You have to be level-headed, work through your feelings, identify what's fears, and then make the most logical decision, if that makes any sense. I have a sneaking suspicion it won't until you get to that point, and you'll have to re-watch the video again. I don't know why. I don't know why, but I'm just gonna say it. I keep seeing one of the dogs, and I'm hearing Scooby's name. They're like little red berries or beads or beans or something like that. To me, they look like the little red berries that are on holly plants, I think. But I don't think that's what they are. But anyways, I keep hearing, don't let him eat them. So I don't know if he's doing it or if there's like maybe you take them on a walk or something like that. It's whatever it is that he's trying to eat them and they're not good for him. So maybe be aware of that. Your card is the Queen of Swords. The Queen of Swords is always the strong one. She's the one that holds everything together. That's her job because she's the strong one. Strong-minded, self-sufficient woman, a headstrong and efficient person, a source of inspiration. Let me just say this. If I were to ask you who you would, if you knew somebody that you could describe like that, who would that be? And of course, I see Frankie. But she says, you would be surprised to know that you are that woman too. She says, it doesn't matter how you were conditioned and it doesn't matter how you were trained. You can choose to be that source of inspiration that you are, or you can choose to be a broken human being. It's up to you. She says, I know which one you are, but it's up to you to believe that you are. That's what I have for you. Moving on to Jenny, we have no planets in Leo this month. Focus continues to be on the mind, bringing some ideas up to bat here. I don't know why you have any time for ideas, being, that it's the last week of March, but you do have this week and 2 more weeks, right? And then you're pretty much done with the first part of it and you can rest, which is good. Focus also moves into the past as well, and which puts us in kind of a spot where there are multiple focuses coming into play here because those particular houses are very small at this time right now. Which does kind of bring past thoughts in to fuel the mental process now. And so in some ways, this could be triggers of things that have happened before, maybe different personalities that you have to deal with. But also, I feel that in many ways, it's the past that's inspiring ideas for you. That really is the focus on. And I also kind of see or feel like sometimes, like I think I said this last week also, that it's your mind focusing on something else gives you a break from constantly focusing on numbers. So these ideas coming up are it's almost like entertainment while you take a break from the numbers, the constant numbers, if that makes sense. in that sense, definitely a good idea to write these ideas down, because I do feel like there's going to be a couple of them specifically that are like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that before? And it's just going to be like mind blowing. It's going to change everything. I don't know how, I don't know what it is specifically. I just feel like once it pops into your head, you're going to be like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? Yes, I totally want to do that. And it's going to take up, it's almost like the planning for that is going to take up a lot of time from there once you kind of hold on to it. You know how it is when we human beings like we hold on to an idea and become like obsessed with it. Obviously, you can't really do that now, but you can write it down and put it aside for later on when you can get to it, if that makes sense. The other thing The other thing that's coming up around you is, mm, I'm just gonna say this. If there's something that needs to be done on your car, I know you're not a put off until later kind of person. Okay. But I also know you're really busy now. So if something comes up, like a tire issue, not like a flat tire, but oh, I really should replace those tires all of a sudden, or the tire light comes on the car, or the oil light comes on the car, or some little maintenance thing on the car, do not put it off if you can avoid it. As much of a pain in the butt as it is to deal with it now. And I say this as a person that would put it off. Okay. But I'm being told to tell you that's not a good idea. It could almost be detrimental to the car or to you. So if it comes up annoying, just deal with it. Um, it may not be the car either, like a health thing, like something you keep getting a headache and you don't normally do, or you keep getting some other thing and you don't normally do. Don't put it off. I know you probably don't have time for it, but don't put it off. Ace of Wands. In its upright position, aces are new beginnings, wands are new adventures, and that's just awesome. Ace of Wands right here. Fresh ideas, new beginnings, fresh ideas, opportunities to branch out, and the birth of new ideas. Lots of exciting stuff. Whatever this is, the maintenance, whether it's the car, whether it's you, I'm not saying it's serious. I'm saying don't put it off. Okay. I don't want to scare you. It's nothing scary like that. It's just more of a, you can put it off and forget about it and put it off for a lot longer, and then it does become a problem. That's kind of where I'm coming from with that. Um, New opportunities, fresh ideas. You're becoming very much in demand. Everybody wants a little bit of Jenny. That's kind of cool and kind of scary and overwhelming at the same time. Sure, I do get. So self-care. Self-care is important. You have boundaries, use them. That's what I have for you, my friend. Moving on to Linda, we're kicking off the week with the moon in Virgo for a few hours on Sunday, basically, and in opposition with the sun and Neptune. So we kind of ended last week in this position, and it's carrying over into the first few hours of this week, basically, which is frustrating. The frustration really is having to start off your week like this. It's not the greatest energy to start off the weekend, but we don't get the greatest energy to start off the week every single week either. It's just that's not how it works. unfortunately. Luckily, it's only for a few hours, and then you have a much clearer energy to work with for the rest of the week. Um, the moon's focus is on the home. We have the sun and Neptune's focus on career. So again, we have that toggle back and forth where it feels like you're having to focus on work, you're having to focus on family. You need two of you kind of a thing. As that leaves your sign later on in the day, things start to calm down. So it's not quite so detrimental, or feels not quite so detrimental. What we're left with is the dark moon for the first few days of the week being in Virgo, focused on the home, and Juno, which is still retrograde, but focused on the mind and how the mind works. So really, this is, to me, it represents how we think about the people in our lives, because the relationships that we form with people are 100% formed on how we perceive them. And so, and how we mentally perceive them. And on one hand, it's a good time to check in. Like, for instance, I've noticed in my own relationship with my husband, where when he does something nice for me, then mentally I'm projecting the knight in shining armor on the white horse, and oh my gosh, he's just so hot and he's so wonderful, and most of the time that's how I refer to him. But when he irritates me, mentally I go through everything he's ever done to irritate with me, or he's ever done to irritate me, which continuously proves how horrible he is. And he's not a horrible person. So, I mean, he's a human being and a man at that. He has his downfalls. Everybody does. So, a lot of my relationship is based on how I perceive him in the moment. And this really is what it's all about, because in many cases with some of our relationships, it's the situations that we're dealing with in the moment that form how we feel about that person in the moment. Now, it doesn't necessarily change, if you're having difficulties with your husband, it doesn't necessarily change, how much you love him or not, but it does change how you approach him, how you're dealing with the situation, how much energy you are salvaging to put into this. That irritation zaps up a lot of energy, and it zaps up our focus too. So we're not really able to 100% focus as well as we should. So I kind of feel like this is what's the driving force is throughout the week. And it's not just your relationships in terms of your husband and your children, but the relationships of the people that you work with. You know as well as I do that the minute that we establish that somebody is stupid, they're stupid forever. And I mean, I'm admitting it, and I know you'll admit it too. And that is really on us. Doesn't matter if they're actually stupid or not. We are driving that thought bus. And sometimes we need to check ourselves in order to make sure that we're not maybe misjudging this person, or perhaps shutting the door to the opportunity to help them be less ignorant about whatever it is we think they're stupid for. Um, that's part of our growth, right? I also, I think it's funny because with personalities like yours and mine are very similar in, I wouldn't say that either one of us have a high ego and we're not arrogant people. More like, I know how I like things done and I am efficient, and I would like everybody else to be that way. And I think that in situations like that, it's very easy to criticize when somebody isn't that way, and less easy for us to say, well, you know what? Come over here and let me help you get to that. Or even better, help them to get to their level of efficiency. Maybe not, even if it's not, everybody can't be as good as we are. I know. It just is what it is. Okay, I'm gonna cut the cards right here. And I'm pulling the Hermit in reverse. This guy, man, this guy. I'm gonna pull a different one. The Hangman. Okay. So the Hermit in reverse is like, why is the world out to get me right now? Okay. And he likes to come up a lot in these readings, and that's why I decided to pull another card. The Hanged Man is sitting there not knowing, it's like not making a decision about something, which I would never associate you with, but we all get there from time to time. So maybe what you need to hear is that by not fully making this decision, it's like you're putting yourself in the position to become more and more and more frustrated and irritated with everything because you're avoiding something that you need to just stop avoiding and dealing with, whatever that is. And that's what I have for you. I'm kind of blown over thinking that because I wouldn't think that of you. But then again, that's my perception of you, that you would absolutely never do that, knowing that you're a human being and might do it anyways, right? It's kind of funny how that goes. Okay, that's what I have for you, Linda. I'm going to take a break, and then when I get back, finish up the rest of the readings. Okay, moving on to Maddie. So we ended last week with basically a full moon, and which is sort of carrying into the very beginning of this week for the first few hours of Sunday. By the end of Sunday, it'll be over, so it could cause a little bit of problem. The moon's focus is on the home. Virgo's focus is on the home in opposition. I always take a break and I always kiss the cat, and then I always have cat hair all over my face. In opposition with the Sun and Neptune, which are both focused on career and legacy, basically your future plans. So, with what I know is that your boyfriend is moving in with you guys, and there's plans around that. And I think we all kind of just want things to be easy and smooth sailing and not have problems, but there's always problems because we're dealing with other people, and it just, I think it's just really unrealistic to go through life thinking that there isn't going to be a problem, because there always is. So to me, this is more of a, it's almost like you get into an argument with your boyfriend, and all of a sudden it's just like, you panic and you don't know if you want him to move in and blah blah blah, and then you just kind of get over it because it's just one of those things that happens. It's not the end of the world. He didn't, like, haul out and beat you or anything like that. And so I mean, if he did, there would be so many people lined up to kill him, it would be not even funny. But I don't really get a feeling that he would be like that necessarily. So I think this is more of like a panic that will go away. The moon's also coming in, or leaving, I should say, in a trine with Pluto, which is focused on finances. And Pluto is all about change and transformation. So it's also kind of giving you some ideas on what to do about that. And one of the things that I did here, and I'm going to say, you go, Maddie, is that I heard your boyfriend is going to join the union and everything's going to be okay, and you can just stay home and you don't have to work. And I heard that you were like, no, I'm going to work and make my own money. Go you, right? Go you. I am so proud of you for coming to that conclusion. It can be very easy to be like, okay, but again, it's better for you to start as you mean to keep going, if that makes sense. So there's kind of opportunities opening up, I would say, around that. As the moon leaves, there is no more planet influences other than the influences that we've been having. Juno's influence, which is all about how you relate to others. And Juno's focus has moved into more of how you perceive others mentally and how much emotion has to do with that mental perception, if that makes sense. So a good example of that would be, you love your dad. Your dad's the most awesome person in the world. He's wonderful because he is your dad and because of the relationship that the two of you have. Now, if he was somebody completely different and not the cool guy that he is, and spent most of his time ignoring you or being mean to you or rude to you, you would have a completely different perception of your dad. So and it's fine to have these perceptions of people, but we also have this tendency to form these opinions about people, and then we don't like it when our opinions are tested or changed, or they prove that they're not the people that we think they are, if that makes sense. And part of that is them, but a lot of it has to do with us and who we think they are. And so consequently, like in a relationship, I'd have to say, in all honesty, that in almost 30 years, my perception of Uncle Dave has not changed, but it has changed so much at the same time. I can't really even describe it. It's like the root of he's hot and I just want to climb him has never gone away. Okay. I know that's probably too much information. That has never gone away. But who he was as an 18-year-old was really changed by the time we got to the 30-year-old. And here we are now at the almost 47-year-old. And it's not necessarily in a bad way, but in many cases, it's more of a logical way. But when you're young, I just like worship him like a god because I didn't know, really 100% what kind of personality I was getting myself into back then. So it's good. I think it's good for our perceptions of people to change. Let's just say, for example, if my perception of Uncle Dave was continued to be that he was a god and yet he treated me badly, that wouldn't be a good thing because I would be so stuck on who I want him to be that I wouldn't be able to see who he really is. And so sometimes checking that about ourselves helps us to be more realistic in who we're dealing with, if that makes sense. Um, because it's going to happen, and it happens with everybody that you know. Sometimes, you hear about things that just freak you out, and all of a sudden it feels like it's going to change everything, that you think about them. And the reality is that sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. It just kind of is what it is. Um, we also have the dark moon moving out of Virgo, but before she does that, her focus really is on changes in the home and making these drastic changes, which obviously you would be doing with things being moved around and getting ready to have your boyfriend move in. So makes total sense. I'm gonna cut the cards here, way down there, because that's where they said to go. Okay. The Hierophant in reverse. This is interesting. I mean, I don't know, because I don't know it off the top of my feeling discontented with the way things are at this time, it is time to break out of your rut and find something new to inspire you. You kind of got a lot going on, but I can also see where I can also see where part of him moving in is nice because it is going to shake things up. It is going to change things a little bit so that they're not quite so stagnant, which is good. But I also feel that it's important that you kind of explore some new things for yourself as well. Maybe some new interests or um something along those lines. Even fun things get tiring and boring and too much after a while, and you just kind of need to take a break from it and do something else. Otherwise it kind of feels like you get stuck in it or it's dragging you down or something along those lines. So that's what I have for you, darling. Moving on to Regina. We have no planets in Scorpio until, of course, the moon comes into Scorpio. And that's going to be fun for a few days, actually, because we're going to be interacting through basically all 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, kicking off in a T-square with Pluto and Mercury on Wednesday. The moon's focus is on those you love. Mercury, of course, is influencing those that love you or those that support you, while Pluto is really all about transformation of finances. So this really feels like one of those instances where, you got financial plans, you're starting to scoot ahead, something happens, probably to somebody else around you, that's going to take up some of that money that you've been putting aside. The fact that your husband just had a heart attack, it's not surprising that would be something that could come up or something that may happen, if that makes sense. And it's very frustrating when that happens. Sometimes, and for a lot of us, because I think there's more of us that financially struggle than there are people who don't in the world. And it really can feel like we're constantly struggling. We're constantly, every time we try to get a little bit ahead, something comes in and screws everything up. And so having the moon come in to amplify this, it just adds more stress than you really wanted to add in the first place. As we move into Thursday and Friday, we take the money element out of it, but it's still the moon in opposition with Jupiter and Uranus, so that those you love against those that love you. So, it very easily can turn into something happened to your husband. And while he has to recover from that, you have to deal with everything else. And it's always hard for that person who has to deal with everybody else because everything else around that, because nobody looks at you and says, who are you having to deal with all of this? It's like your job to deal with everything because you're already dealing with everything. That's always been your job, but it still feels like crap when it feels like people are just expecting that of you and not even thanking you for it or acknowledging that you're doing it. And then we kind of struggle with guilt because it's like, well, it's not all about that. I mean, he could have died. And, here I am, I should just be grateful that I'm dealing with this. And so we put ourselves through that whole argument in our own heads with ourselves. And it just, again, the moon's there for 3 days. Okay. You can drag this out and make yourself crazy for 3 whole days with it. You cannot control what's happening in your environment. The only thing that you can control is how you deal with the situation. And when you get emotionally overwhelmed, at least for me, when I get emotionally overwhelmed, I know that I need to take a step back. I need to separate myself from whatever it is that I'm dealing with. I need to take a 5-10 minute break. Smoking cigarettes helps because it gives you that break. In fact, that's why it's so hard for me to quit. Honestly, I'm like, what am I going to do on that break? Just sit there and do nothing? I mean, um, and do some deep breathing exercises. Get yourself back into a focus. So you're not trying to focus on something when you're emotionally overwhelmed with all of these other thoughts. It's the easiest way to make mistakes. And in some of these cases, you definitely don't want to be making mistakes, right? It's not something that you want to be making mistakes around. The good thing is that the moon is helpful also as it moves into a trine with Saturn and Mars. And then as it moves into Thursday and Friday, moves into a trine with Venus as well as Neptune. And you get a little bit of that feel of its trine with the sun on its way out on Friday. All of these planets are focused on your long-term career goals. So while you're dealing with all of this craziness, things are looking up in terms of movement or promotion or what have you in your career. Basically, what it comes down to is that even though it feels like you're completely alone, you're not. You still have support. And I feel that support coming from the people that you work with. In some cases, maybe other people that you work with in the store, but also management being very supportive in that as well. And in some cases, it's not slowing down your progress on your goals, basically, which is good. Because a lot of times, it can feel like something like that is just so big and overwhelming, you can't focus on anything else. But it's also a good outlet to focus on something else, something that's a little bit more positive. Believe it or not, work is the positive focus, which is it's kind of ironic knowing what I know. Um, but it also kind of proves that, even things that are quote unquote bad, a lot of the time are not always bad. Sometimes it's good to be able to get out and go to work and not have to focus on the fact that you're going through this right now with your husband. Ace of Wands in this position. The aces are new beginnings. The wands are new adventures. So it really is all about fresh ideas, new beginnings, possibly new adventures. One of the things that I do see in this happening with, the aftermath of your husband having a heart attack is discussions about changes. Possibly focusing on vacations that the two of you can take, or, not just spending all of your time working all the time, but enjoying some of that time together, different things like that, because it's become more important to do so. When these things happen, they show you that we all have a shelf life, and, putting things off until someday, sometimes they never happen. And you have an opportunity to make these things happen, make them a priority. So it's not a bad discussions to have for sure. So that's what I have for you. Moving on to Theresa, we have no planets in Scorpio, and it's kind of in between focuses this week until the moon comes into Scorpio. And it is going to be a thing all through all 3 days that it is in Scorpio, as it kicks off its time in your sign on Wednesday in a pretty big challenge with Mercury. The moon is focused on those you love. Mercury is focused on those that loved you. There's an opposition there, so that creates a problem right off the bat. Both planets squared with Pluto, which is focused on finances. So this really, to me, is one of those situations where you have goals, financial goals, you put a lot of work into those financial goals, something comes up from someone else, and it sort of siphons all that money that you worked so hard to put aside for. And it could be a medical issue, but it's still frustrating nonetheless. And a lot of times when you get frustrated like that, especially when it's an issue around a family member, there's a lot of guilt in the fact that you do feel frustrated. And so it's a lot of mixed emotions, and it can be really overwhelming. And the fact that the moon is the helm of this is probably not going to lessen that. And it's okay. I just, first of all, I want to say one thing here, okay? And that is that I know how hard you work. I know how dedicated you are to your family and your job and your financial freedom and all of the things. I know how dedicated you are to all of that. And it is okay to mourn the money. It is okay to feel the way that you feel. And it's important to take the time to honor those feelings. When you try to avoid them, they wind up consuming you. And it's like you can't get it out of your head. It's the only thing that you can focus your energy on. You even wake up being mad about it right off the bat when you wake up. It's just, there's no reason for any of that. It's better for you to take the time, honor your feelings, regardless of whether they're good, bad, or indifferent. They're your feelings. You have the right to have them, and then move on and take care of your responsibility, whatever that is, if that makes sense. As we go to Wednesday, money becomes less of a problem, but we do still have the moon in an opposition with Jupiter and Uranus for 2 days. So again, it's those you love against those that love you. So it's one of those, it feels like no matter what you do to help and to support and to take care of people, they're not there to help and support and take care of you. And this is a situation that most of us mothers and housewives or wives, period, or just people in general find ourselves in that situation where we're taking care of somebody that just cannot reciprocate that in a way. And again, while you understand that and it makes sense, it still feels crappy. And it's okay to feel like that. I think that where we human beings make it really difficult on ourselves is that we just get so overwhelmed with our feelings to the point we can't seem to dig our way out of them. And it just consumes us, and it takes up a lot of time, because I know that at some point you're going to pull yourself out of that and go, you know what, don't have time for that, gotta move on. So the quicker you can do that, the better. But honor your feelings at the same time. You want to make sure that you're not just pushing them down because you can't deal with them right now. Honor them, accept them, embrace them, and let them go. Let them be whatever it is they need to be. While all of this is going on, the moon is in a trine with Mars, with Saturn on Wednesday, with Venus moving into a trine with Venus and Neptune on Thursday, still in a trine with Neptune by Friday, and you're kind of feeling the effects of a trine with the sun as well, as it moves into Sagittarius, or the sun, or the moon, I'm sorry, moves into Sagittarius. All these planets are putting energy towards your long-term career goals. So even though you're dealing with this situation with your loved ones, things are still moving along and plans are still moving along with your career, which means whatever money you're out will be recouped. So I think it's important that we look at money as energy. It has to keep moving. While it's a good idea to squirrel some away, don't get me wrong, it has to keep moving. It has to keep that flow going, because without the flow going, it can't flow in if we're not allowing it to flow out also. And, really, it's just good that you have the means to be able to deal with this situation. That's the silver lining on that cloud, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to pull a card for you here. Mm. One more shuffle. Okay. What do we got here? We've got the Three of Wands in reverse. And the Three of Wands in reverse indicates postponements, creative blocks, delays, or cancellations of plans or travel arrangements. It was actually kind of funny, and I didn't say it before I pulled the card, was it just sort of flashed in and then out, and then I kind of let it go. But I don't see a lot of traveling this week. And to pull that card and to specifically see cancellation or postponement of plans, this, whatever this is that comes in around this moon time, may be the reason why you're having to postpone some plans. But it's not going to negatively affect your career plans. Everything's still moving forward there, even if you have to deal with something personal, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you, my friend. Moving on to Jillian. No planets in Scorpio until the moon comes in. There's really no Scorpio's kind of in the middle of in between focuses right now. So really it's trucking along until that moon comes in right in the middle of the week and just screws everything up. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, the moon will be in Scorpio, kicking off its time on Wednesday in a pretty big challenge as it moves into opposition with Mercury, which is focused on those that support you. Currently, the moon's focus is on those you support, in opposition with Mercury and those that support you. Both planets squared with Pluto, which is all about change and transformation around your finances. So to me, this is a very cut and dry, in one of those instances where you've really been focused on your financial goals, what you want to do with your money, how you want your money to work for you. Somebody else kind of sort of comes in, needs the money. Now all of a sudden you're having to take some of that money that you've worked so hard to put aside and save and help somebody else out with it. Or this happens a lot of times in relationships where you have your sets of financial goals and he has his. And if you don't discuss them, they're never going to match up. So for instance, my sister-in-law just worked her tail off putting money in a savings to buy a house. And when she got to a certain amount of money, her husband was like, we're going to go glamping, and went out and bought like a fifth wheel or something like that. All that money that she saved, and he just went out and spent it. And it can also represent something along those lines. Well, I don't see that happening so much. I feel this is more like something comes up and you have to use the money for that. And it may not necessarily be something that comes up that you have coming up, but somebody else around you coming up, if that makes sense. It's frustrating. And depending on who this person is, it can be really, really frustrating. I think who the person is probably has more to do with the level of frustration than the actual act itself, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, if my grandma needed money that I had been scrimping and saving and putting away, and she needed it, I would have no problem handing it to her. I'd be bummed that it wasn't there, but I would have no problem because she never asked for anything, and I'm happy to help her. If it was my mother, it would be completely different. I would be so angry to even have to think about parting with that money, because there's a long history of her leeching off of me for years. So there's a completely different vibe between the two there for me personally. And our triggers do have a lot to do with that. And so, and the moon, of course, being involved in that definitely is going to make it emotional. As we get into Thursday and Friday, things are not quite as amplified. The money part of it is no longer there, but the moon moving into opposition with Jupiter and Uranus still continues to have that. Why aren't the people that I'm supporting me back kind of feel? And I think that this is another one of those things that we humans really get ourselves wrapped up in, this anger and frustration over the fact that we don't get back what we put into most relationships, or we don't feel like we're getting back what we're putting into most relationships. In some ways, it's a temporary thing, like they just can't be there to be supportive right now, but normally they are. I've been through that with Uncle Dave a million times. In other instances, it's the hard, cold truth that no matter how much energy you put into somebody, they're not going to match it because they don't know how, because they're unwilling to, because they don't want to change. There's a million reasons why. I kind of look at this. There's two opportunities here for you. One, it's an opportunity for you to step out of what you feel it should be and look at it for what it is and notice the difference in how it feels. When you do that, it takes you out of your ego. And there's nothing wrong with being in your ego, but a lot of times our egos try to set it up so that, especially when you grow up with a lot of trauma in your life, it's like our egos are constantly setting us up for disappointment from other people. So we can constantly prove that people are just not for us, right? We're always going to be let down, and we have to constantly prove that to ourselves. And that's really what you want to be aware of, because it is so strong that even though you've spent an entire lifetime working on it, it's still really easy to fall into. To me, to this day, it's still very easy for me to fall into. And I manage how much time is taken up by that. Not whether or not it's going to happen, but how much time I allow for it to keep being a problem for me, if that makes sense. Now, all through this challenge, the moon is in trines with Mars, Saturn, Venus, Neptune, and a little bit of the sun as it leaves on Friday. All of these planets are focused on your long-term career goals. So while you may be having issues in one area of your life, things are moving forward in terms of your career plans. Everything that you set in place is basically working towards building the next step in your career goals. So it also becomes a question. Do you really want to focus your time on your frustration over things you can't control around somebody else? Or do you want to focus your energy on your success? Because they're both there, and each one of them is powerful or not powerful, depending on what kind of energy you choose to put into it, basically. And that is true for everything. I have spent most of my adult life with a always wishing I had something better than I had mentality. And all that has done is make me feel dissatisfied when I have nothing to feel dissatisfied about, really. I mean, not everything is perfect, but a lot of that has to do with me and what I'm putting into that. I pulled the Ace of Wands for you. This is the card of the week. It keeps coming up in the readings. And it's really important, or it's really exciting, because the aces are new beginnings. The wands are a fire element, so they're all about really new adventures. Um, the birth of new ideas. It's almost like I'm seeing you sort of right before you jump in to do something completely new and completely different. And it's scary, but it's exciting, and it's fun, and it's a little overwhelming, but I think you're gonna love it. I think you're gonna love every minute of it. Um, so that's what I have for you, darling. Moving on to Peg, we have the moon coming into your sign. Late Friday into Saturday. And as the moon is coming into your sign, so focus still is on your day-to-day schedule. We still have Pallas Athene really influencing things there, still in retrograde. This Pallas Athene is retrograde this week. So it's not so much of a fight over your schedule as maybe it could be in some ways a what's the word? Where they throw in the a surrender. Like you're surrendering to it. But I don't think surrendering to it is a bad thing either, because I feel like maybe this is something that you're recognizing. You shouldn't be fighting against it. You should just surrender to it and see what happens. Obviously not in a blindfolded way, but I think it's surrendering to it because you're not allowing the fears of what could happen run the show anymore. You're surrendering to this to see where it can take you, if that makes sense. The moon's influence on this towards the end of the week, the moon does come into your sign in a square with Mars and Saturn and Venus, even a little bit into Neptune, all of which are focused on long-term career goals. So as you're surrendering to this thing that you've been fighting against, the moon comes in and almost amplifies all of your fears at once. It's like something happens to just prove all the reasons why you fought against it. This happens. And a lot of times we perceive it happening to mean that this is proof that this was going to happen. But I also don't see that it's actually happening. It's more something that looks like it could be happening that causes this fear reaction, this panic reaction. Because the moon is involved specifically, you want to be aware of whether or not you're panicking over fact or you're panicking over something that looks like something that could happen but may not be. Because the moon is also in a trine with the sun and will move into a trine later on into the following week with Mercury right before the retrograde too. We are technically in a shadow period this week. And the sun and Mercury both are focused on career, and specifically your support system for your career. And this is really good energy going towards your career. So in some cases, when we see things happen and we panic, what we are blinded to by that panic is the opportunity that could be presenting itself, and that's why it looks like things are sort of falling apart or not going right, if that makes sense. So this also could be an opportunity that you've never been approached. It's not something you've ever done, and that creates some fear around that. Obviously, something you've never done, you don't know what that's going to look like. I mean, that's a lot of pressure on me all the time in terms of running my own business. I got to come up with something new. What do I do? And while I don't want to do what everybody else is doing, it's hard for me to come up with something different. And it's a whole lot of pressure of what doesn't work. Sometimes you just got to get past all that and tell yourself, I'm in control. I know what I need to do. And as long as I keep working on it, it'll work. It's when you give up on it, the things stop working. Does that make sense? I'm going to pull a card for you, and it's the Knight of Pentacles in reverse. Wonder if this is going to tell us what that panic is. Reversed meaning a need to work less. I interpret that. You can interpret it in a couple of different ways. But I kind of interpret that to mean more like, a lot of times we have this mentality that we have to work really, really hard for something. And really, we don't have to work as hard as we think we do. And maybe it's the worry and the unnecessary, quote unquote, planning that's making us work hard when we don't need to. So my advice really is to monitor and manage just how hard you're working so that you're not putting yourself in the position of overworking for no reason, if that makes sense. That's what I have for you. And finally, we are at Mama Sherri. Cheers. Mm. Focus continues to be on your day-to-day schedule this week. Pallas Athene is retrograde officially this week as well. So while up until this week, her energy has all been fighting for your schedule, reversed is more acceptance than fighting against, if that makes sense. What I find interesting for you is, first of all, some of this comes from Tabitha, like accepting the way she lives in your space, if that makes any sense at all. Like for instance, you can't put her toys away. She needs to have them strewn all over the house. Is what she does, and you just have to deal with it. It's little things like that, which I think are hilarious because you never were like that before, but she's training you in a way, which I love. The moon comes into Sagittarius right at the end of the week, Friday night into Saturday. And once the moon gets into that focus of your day-to-day schedule in the square, she kind of moves into your sign, focused on those you love and your day-to-day schedule. And as she moves in, she's moving into a square with Mars, with Saturn, with Venus, with Neptune, all of which are focused on your long-term career goals. So it kind of feels like either you're saying you don't have time to focus on that. It could just be that you don't want to focus on that today, which is fine. It is a Saturday. It is a weekend. There's sort of a struggle with that. And I see you flip-flopping in your brain over it. It doesn't have to be a struggle. Just make a decision. Work on the weekends, great. If you want to, don't want to work the weekends, don't. Maybe compromise between the two and do 2 weekends a month. to make it more convenient for other people. That's definitely something that I've been thinking about doing. The moon's trine with the sun is all about opening up space to shine in your career. So I tend to look at this as we waste time trying to micromanage it, try to overplan it, trying to, worrying about what that's going to look like, or am I going to be exhausted? Wah, 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 wah. You know, I just keep seeing you toggling back and forth between wanting all of your time to yourself and being bored and needing something to fill that time. But you know exactly how to manage that, and your guides have been telling you that. So I guess that's your confirmation. I guess that's your confirmation. Okay, I'm going to cut this deck right here. 5 of Cups. What I always thought is interesting about this one is you see how the 3 cups in the front have fallen over and they have spilled, but there's still 2 sitting there. The 5 of Cups in this position indicates hope for the future, learn valuable lessons from the past. It's pretty vague. Couple of things. First of all, I kind of feel like there's a couple of things that either you just don't have joy in anymore, or you're dealing with the same frustrations you've always dealt with before and you're sick and tired of it. And so rather than dealing, it's time to put some boundaries around it or approach it from the beginning in a different way. The other thing that I feel around that card is I feel like when you make a decision of what you want to do, everything will just fall into place. But you have to own that decision. And that's where you open up hope for the future while learning those lessons from the past, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you. That's what I have for everybody. Yay. All right, I am out. It's party night. And I will see you guys next week. You guys make it a great week.